Angela Hayes had just attended a charity fundraiser, an evening filled with positivity and excitement for a cause she deeply believed in. As she adjusted the rearview mirror of her silver sedan and turned onto a quieter road in suburban Dallas, she felt the weight of the night begin to lift. The hum of the highway faded, and the rhythmic clicking of her heels on the pedals was the only sound she heard. Dressed in a shimmering sequined gown, the cool evening air brushed against her skin as she imagined the warmth of home awaiting her. She glanced at her phone on the passenger seat. It was a message from her husband, Malcolm. A smile tugged at her lips as she read his text. "Be home soon. Miss you." She was almost there. Angela's heart felt lighter at the thought of reuniting with her family after a fulfilling night of supporting the community. But little did she know that her peaceful ride home would take an unexpected and nerve-wracking turn. Suddenly, the red and blue lights of a police cruiser flashed in her rearview mirror, casting an eerie glow across the otherwise quiet road. Angela's brows furrowed in confusion. She wasn't speeding, had obeyed every traffic rule, and wasn't on her phone. A tinge of anxiety crept up, but she reminded herself it might just be a routine check. She pulled over to the side of the road, slowing her car down as she rolled down the window. A tall officer with a stern look approached the car. Without a greeting, he demanded, "License and registration." Angela handed over her documents, maintaining her composure. "Good evening, officer," she said, trying to remain calm. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Her voice remained steady, though her mind was racing. What could this be about? The officer glanced at her license before responding with a curt reply. "We received a report about a vehicle matching this description involved in suspicious activity in the area." Angela's pulse quickened at the word suspicious activity. She repeated the words to herself, trying to keep her voice calm. Suspicious activity? Before she could process what was happening, the officer ordered, "Step out of the car, ma'am." "Excuse me?" Angela asked, her heart now pounding. "I'm not sure I understand." "Step out of the car now." The officer's voice was firm, cutting her off. Another cruiser pulled up behind, and two more officers emerged, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Angela felt the panic rising in her chest. She unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, her hand trembling slightly as she kept it visible, just as her husband had taught her during their many talks about how to handle such situations. "I'm complying," Angela said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up within her. "But I'd like to know why I'm being treated this way." Her calmness seemed to aggravate the officers, who began searching her car without asking for permission. One rifled through the back seat, while the others took to the trunk, shining their flashlights on everything in sight. Angela's heart pounded with humiliation. This wasn't right. She had done nothing wrong. "Can I call my husband?" Angela asked, trying to remain calm. One officer sneered at her. "You can do that after we're done here." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. The last thing she wanted was to escalate the situation. Instead, she silently prayed for the ordeal to end before it went any further. Little did she know that help was about to arrive in the form of her husband, but the situation was about to escalate in ways no one could have expected. Angela stood by her car, watching as the officers rummaged through her belongings. The car's trunk, which had neatly organized materials from the fundraiser, was being treated as if it were filled with evidence of a crime. One officer held up a stack of pamphlets. "What's all this for?" he asked, inspecting the materials with a level of suspicion. Angela's voice was firm, though she was visibly frustrated. "I just left a fundraiser. Those are brochures for a community center we're supporting." The officer stared at her for a moment before dismissing the items with a single toss back into the trunk. Angela's patience was starting to wear thin. The younger officer, seemingly more nervous, approached. "Ma'am, are there any weapons, drugs, or anything illegal in this vehicle?" "No, officer," Angela replied, trying to remain calm despite the mounting frustration. "I've told you I've done nothing wrong. I'd appreciate it if you could explain why I'm being treated this way." The officers only muttered something about doing their job, their terse responses adding to the humiliation Angela felt. She glanced at her phone, still buzzing with an incoming call from Malcolm. "Can I please get my phone?" she asked, her voice steady but demanding. The officers exchanged looks, then one of them said, "No sudden movements?" It was as if she was a threat. Angela had to resist the urge to roll her eyes and instead slowly reached into the car to grab her phone, her movements deliberate and careful. Despite their heightened suspicions, nothing about her behavior seemed to justify their actions. But they weren't done yet. They were running her plates and her license. Angela folded her arms, watching the second cruiser's spotlight shining brightly on her car. The scrutiny, the assumptions, the complete disregard for her dignity. It was infuriating, but she held her composure, knowing that any sign of frustration would only make the situation worse. Her fingers were steady as she dialed Malcolm's number. He picked up almost immediately. "Angela, are you okay? I've been calling." She cut him off quickly, trying to sound as calm as possible despite the chaos. "Malcolm, I've been pulled over by the police and they're searching my car without cause. I need you here. Now." The shift in Malcolm's tone was immediate. His voice, once calm, was now filled with concern and authority. "Where are you? I'm coming." Angela quickly relayed her location. Her voice faltered slightly as the weight of the situation settled in. "Please hurry." She ended the call and looked up, noticing the officers now watching her closely, their postures tense. They didn't know who she had called, but the confidence with which she had spoken seemed to unnerve them. Minutes passed, each feeling longer than the last. Angela stood silently, her composure unwavering. More cars began to slow down, with passengers staring at the scene, clearly curious about what was happening. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up nearby. Angela's heart skipped a beat as a sleek black SUV came to a stop. The driver's door opened and Malcolm Hayes stepped out. Her husband stood tall, exuding authority. His face was a mask of restraint, though beneath it, anger was bubbling. Angela's heart surged with relief, but the moment that followed would change everything. Malcolm Hayes wasn't the type of man to lose his temper easily. His career as a public servant, and most recently as the Dallas County Police Commissioner, had taught him the value of control. He knew how to navigate tense situations, how to keep his cool even when things got heated. But tonight, as he saw his wife standing on the side of the road, surrounded by officers who were treating her like a criminal, something inside him snapped. He stepped out of the SUV, shutting the door firmly behind him. The sound echoed in the otherwise tense silence, drawing the officer's attention. They turned, their eyes widening in surprise as Malcolm approached with a purposeful stride. He was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his police badge clipped to his belt, catching the glow of the streetlights. "Good evening," Malcolm said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "I'm Malcolm Hayes, Dallas County Police Commissioner. Can someone explain to me why my wife is being detained and her vehicle searched without cause?" The older officer, clearly the one in charge, stiffened. He straightened his posture, but avoided meeting Malcolm's eyes. "Sir, we're conducting an investigation. We received a report of suspicious activity involving a car matching this description." Malcolm's jaw clenched. Suspicious activity in a sedan driven by a well-dressed woman coming from a charity event. He paused for a moment, his voice rising slightly. "Do you realize you're speaking to Angela Hayes, my wife?" The younger officer fidgeted uncomfortably, exchanging a glance with his partner. The older officer cleared his throat and spoke again, his voice less confident this time. "We weren't aware of her identity, sir. We were just following protocol." "Protocol?" Malcolm repeated, his voice sharp now. "Since when does protocol involve searching someone's car without their consent or probable cause? Did she give you permission to do this?" The officers fell silent. Malcolm took a step forward, his presence commanding. The tension in the air was thick, almost palpable. Angela stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. Her eyes, though weary, held a look of quiet defiance, and her posture remained composed despite the emotional toll of the situation. "You've harassed an innocent citizen," Malcolm continued, his voice filled with controlled fury. "My wife, no less, without justification. This isn't just unprofessional, it's unacceptable." One of the officers, clearly feeling the pressure, stammered. We we were just doing our job, sir. We didn't mean—" "You didn't mean?" Malcolm cut him off, his tone rising in intensity. "Your actions suggest otherwise. And those cameras," he said, gesturing to the growing number of bystanders with their phones out, "will ensure there's no spinning this later." The officers exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to proceed. The crowd, now gathering around, watched with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. The officers' earlier confidence had dissipated, replaced by a palpable unease. "Explain yourselves," Malcolm demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. "Right here, right now." The older officer hesitated. Realizing they were losing control of the situation, he stepped forward, trying to regain some authority. "Commissioner Hayes, we can de-escalate this situation. Perhaps we can discuss it back at the precinct?" Malcolm let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "De-escalate?" he repeated. "You want to de-escalate now after humiliating my wife and violating her rights? No, we're addressing this here. In public. Exactly where you created this mess." By now, the crowd had grown larger. People were murmuring, some expressing their disbelief at what they were witnessing. Others were recording the entire encounter, making sure the officer's actions were captured for posterity. Angela stood quietly, her arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. Though physically exhausted, her eyes burned with quiet determination. She had never felt so powerless, yet here she was, standing tall, refusing to let the officer's treatment break her spirit. "Call your supervisor," Malcolm ordered, his voice firm. The older officer hesitated, but, under the mounting pressure, reluctantly reached for his radio. The tension in the air was suffocating as the minutes stretched on, each one feeling longer than the last. Malcolm stood his ground, never once backing down. Angela remained silent, watching the growing crowd, which was now riveted by the unfolding drama. After what seemed like an eternity, a black and white SUV arrived, and out stepped Lieutenant Charles Donovan. His uniform was neat and crisply pressed, but his expression betrayed both annoyance and confusion as he surveyed the scene. "What's going on here?" Lieutenant Donovan demanded, his eyes scanning the situation quickly. He barely glanced at Angela before turning his attention to Malcolm. Malcolm didn't waste any time. "Lieutenant Donovan," he began, his voice steady, "your officers here pulled over my wife, conducted an unwarranted search of her vehicle, and have failed to provide any legitimate reason for their actions. I'm waiting for an explanation." Donovan's eyes widened in realization. "Commissioner Hayes, I didn't realize—" "That's the problem, Lieutenant," Malcolm interrupted, his voice still firm but sharp. "It shouldn't matter who she is. Every citizen deserves respect and fair treatment, and this is anything but." The lieutenant's face tightened as he turned to the officers, his frustration mounting. "Is this true? Did you search her vehicle without cause?" The older officer hesitated. "We had a report about suspicious activity." Malcolm cut him off, his voice slicing through the air like a knife. "Cut the excuses. You had no cause, none. And now not only have you harassed an innocent woman, but you've also put this entire department under scrutiny. Do you even understand the gravity of what you've done?" Lieutenant Donovan rubbed his temple, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Commissioner, I assure you this will be investigated thoroughly. I'll handle it personally." Malcolm stepped even closer, his gaze unflinching. "This isn't just about an investigation, Lieutenant. It's about accountability. You don't get to sweep this under the rug. Not this time." The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones still recording every word. Malcolm turned toward the bystanders, his voice rising to address them directly. "To everyone here," he said, raising his voice, "this is the kind of behavior we've been fighting to eliminate in our police force. No one, no matter their status, their job, or their skin color, should have to endure this kind of treatment. This is why accountability matters." A few people in the crowd clapped in support, their applause rippling through the air. Angela, despite her exhaustion, couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride as she looked at her husband. He was doing the right thing, fighting for justice in a situation that had been anything but just. Lieutenant Donovan looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Commissioner, perhaps we can move this conversation somewhere private." Malcolm didn't hesitate. "No," he said firmly. "Transparency happens here, in front of the people you serve. Your officers need to understand that there are consequences for their actions. If they don't, nothing will ever change." The officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing the balance of power had shifted. Donovan struggled to respond, but his words faltered. It was clear there was no escaping the consequences of their actions. The fallout from that night came swiftly. The following morning, news outlets were buzzing with the story. Video recordings of the confrontation went viral, quickly circulating across social media platforms with hashtags like #Justice for Angela and #Accountability Matters. News stations played the footage on loop, questioning the integrity of the Dallas County Police Department. At home, Angela and Malcolm sat side by side at their dining table, the morning light streaming through the windows. Angela sipped her coffee, her body still tired from the night before. Malcolm scrolled through his phone, reading the articles and comments with a heavy heart. "They're calling it the Hayes incident," he said, his voice somber. "I knew it would get attention, but it's bigger than I expected." Angela set her cup down and turned to him. "It's not about us, Malcolm. It's about what this represents. How many people go through this every day and don't have the platform we do? They deserve justice too." Malcolm nodded. His face was serious, his mind already thinking about the steps that needed to be taken. "I've spent my entire career trying to root out this kind of behavior," he said quietly. "And now it's clear there's so much more to do." This event set in motion changes within the department. In the days that followed, Malcolm held an emergency press conference, flanked by Angela and other leadership members. He addressed the crowd with resolve, announcing a full investigation into the incident and reaffirming the commitment to systemic change within the department. Angela, using her platform, became an advocate for justice, amplifying the voices of those who couldn't speak for themselves. The officers involved faced disciplinary actions, with one of them even choosing to resign. The Hayes family had turned a painful moment into a catalyst for change, proving that real progress begins with accountability and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. And, as Angela often said, "It's not just about what happened to me. It's about what we do to ensure it doesn't happen to anyone else."